The dust from the cattle drive still clung to James Hartley's clothes when he spotted movement in the wildflower meadow just beyond the ridge, and what he saw made him rein his horse to a complete stop on that warm June afternoon in 1876. A woman danced alone among the purple lupines and golden poppies, her calico dress swirling around her ankles as she moved to music only she could hear. James dismounted slowly, tying his bay mare to a cottonwood tree, then settled himself against the trunk where the shade kept him hidden. He told himself he would watch for just a moment, make sure she was safe out here alone in the Wyoming Territory wilderness, but one moment stretched into 5, then 10, then more. The woman spun and dipped, her arms extended gracefully, her dark hair coming loose from its pins to tumble down her back. There was something utterly captivating about her unself-conscious joy, the way she moved as though the whole world existed just for this dance. James checked his pocket watch. 15 minutes had passed. He should ride on, head back to the ranch where his brother would be wondering what delayed him. Instead, he remained perfectly still, watching as she waltzed with an invisible partner, her face tilted toward the afternoon sun. 30 minutes. 45. The shadows lengthened across the meadow, and still she danced, lost in her private reverie. James felt like an intruder, yet he could not tear himself away. There was a story in her movements, something both joyful and melancholy that spoke to the lonely places in his own heart. When a full hour had passed, the woman finally slowed, her chest rising and falling with exertion. She pressed both hands to her flushed cheeks and laughed, the sound carrying across the meadow like wind chimes. James made his decision then, stepping out from the tree line before he could second-guess himself. His boots swished through the tall grass, and the woman spun around, her eyes widening with alarm. "I am sorry to startle you, miss," James said quickly, removing his hat. "I just rode up over the ridge. I could not help but notice you dancing." The woman's hand flew to her chest, her breathing still quick from the exertion. Up close, James could see she was probably around 22 or 23, with warm brown eyes and a smattering of freckles across her nose. "You frightened me half to death," she said, but there was no real anger in her voice, only surprise. "I apologize for that," James said, staying where he was, giving her space. "It is just that I have not seen anyone look that happy in a long time, and I wondered if you might honor me with one more dance. A proper waltz, if you are willing." The woman stared at him, clearly trying to decide if he was dangerous or simply bold. James kept his expression open and honest, his hat held respectfully in his hands. He was 25 years old, sun-weathered and trail-worn, but his mother had raised him to be a gentleman, and he hoped that showed. "There is no music," she finally said, though her lips curved into the beginning of a smile. "I believe you have been managing fine without it for the past hour," James replied, then winced. "I mean, I did not intend to watch for so long. I just could not seem to look away." A blush colored her cheeks, but she laughed. "That is either the most honest or the most concerning thing a stranger has ever said to me." "I am hoping for honest," James said. "My name is James Hartley. My brother and I have a ranch about 5 miles east of here. I was heading home from checking on our herd when I saw you." The woman studied him for another long moment, then seemed to make up her mind. "Catherine Moore," she said. "My father owns the general store in Clearwater. I come out here sometimes when I need to think." "And do you always think with your feet?" James asked, surprised by his own playfulness. Something about Catherine made him want to smile, made him forget the exhaustion of the long cattle drive he had just completed. "Sometimes thinking requires movement," Catherine said. "Sometimes sitting still with your thoughts is the worst thing you can do." There was a shadow behind her words that made James wonder what thoughts she was trying to outdance, but he did not press. Instead, he took a step closer and extended his hand. "One waltz, Miss Moore, then I will leave you to your meadow." Catherine looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and honest, then placed her smaller hand in his. "One waltz," she agreed. James drew her closer, placing his other hand carefully at her waist. He could feel the warmth of her through the thin cotton dress, could smell lavender soap and sunshine on her skin. For a moment they stood there, finding their balance, finding their position. Then James began to hum a melody his mother used to sing. A Viennese waltz she had played on the piano in their Virginia home before the war changed everything. They moved together across the meadow, and James was surprised by how perfectly Catherine followed his lead, how naturally they fit together. She was light on her feet, graceful and sure, and when she looked up at him, her brown eyes were filled with something that made his heart stutter in his chest. They waltzed through the wildflowers, crushing the sweet scent from the petals beneath their feet, and James realized he had never felt anything quite like this before. He had courted a few women back east, had even thought himself in love once, but this was different. This felt like recognition, like finding something he had not known he was searching for. "You dance well, Mr. Hartley," Catherine said softly as they turned beneath the slanting golden light. "You make it easy, Miss Moore," James replied. "I feel like I am dancing on air." They continued until James ran out of melody to hum, then stood there in the crushed flowers, still holding each other, neither quite willing to let go. The sun was sinking toward the western mountains now, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "I should get back," Catherine said reluctantly. "My father will worry." "May I ride with you into town?" James asked. "It will be dark soon, and there are wolves in these hills." Catherine nodded, and they walked together toward where his horse was tied. James helped her mount first, then swung up behind her, acutely aware of how she fit against him, how right it felt to have her there. They rode in comfortable silence for the first mile, then Catherine spoke. "I was dancing because tomorrow I am supposed to give my answer to Richard Thornton. He has asked me to marry him." The words hit James like a fist to the gut, but he kept his voice steady. "And what will your answer be?" "I do not know," Catherine admitted. "Richard is successful. He owns the largest ranch in the county. My father thinks it would be a good match." "What do you think?" James asked. Catherine was quiet for so long that James thought she might not answer. Then she said, "I think that when Richard looks at me, he sees a possession he wants to acquire. I think that he has never once asked me what I dream about. I think that marrying him would be safe and comfortable and completely joyless." "Then do not marry him," James said simply. Catherine turned her head to look at him over her shoulder. "You say that as though it is easy. Is it not? If you do not love him, do not marry him. I am 23 years old, Mr. Hartley. I have turned down 3 proposals already. My father says I am too particular, that I am waiting for something that does not exist." "What are you waiting for?" James asked. Catherine faced forward again, but her voice was clear when she answered. "I am waiting to feel something, anything. I am waiting for someone to look at me and see Catherine, not just a shopkeeper's daughter or a potential wife or a means to an end. I am waiting to feel the way I felt just now, dancing in the meadow." James tightened his arm around her waist, a subtle gesture that made Catherine lean back against him. "You felt it too, then," he said. "I thought perhaps I was imagining it." "I felt it," Catherine whispered. They rode the rest of the way to Clearwater in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, charged with possibility. The town was small, just a handful of buildings clustered around a dusty main street. James could see the general store at the far end, lamplight already glowing in the windows. He helped Catherine down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Catherine looked up at him, her face serious. "I do not know if that would be wise. If I turn Richard down tomorrow, there will be talk. If I am seen with another man so soon after, there will be scandal." I do not care about talk or scandal, James said fiercely. Catherine, I know this is mad, I know we just met. But I watched you dance for an hour before I ever spoke to you, and in that hour I saw something that made me believe in magic again. Please, let me see you again. Catherine bit her lip, clearly torn. Then she said, There is a church social on Saturday evening. Everyone in town will be there. You could come. It would not be inappropriate. I will be there, James promised. Catherine smiled, and it transformed her whole face. Then I will look for you, James Hartley. She turned and walked toward the store, but before she reached the door, she looked back once more. James touched his hat brim in farewell, then mounted his horse and rode toward home, his heart pounding harder than it had during any cattle stampede or bar fight he had ever experienced. His brother Thomas was sitting on the porch of their ranch house when James finally arrived, long after full dark. I was about to send out a search party, Thomas called. Where have you been? James dismounted and began unsaddling his mare, suddenly aware that he was grinning like a fool. I met a woman. Thomas sat up straighter. You what? I met a woman. The most incredible woman I have ever seen in my life. Thomas laughed and came down the steps to help with the horse. You have been on the trail for 3 months. You probably think any woman is incredible at this point. No, James said seriously. This is different, Tom. This is real. Over the next few days, James could think of nothing but Catherine. He threw himself into ranch work with almost manic energy, fixing fence lines that did not need fixing, reorganizing the barn, anything to keep his hands busy while his mind wandered. Thomas teased him mercilessly, but there was affection in it. The brothers had always been close, especially after their parents died from fever 8 years earlier, leaving them to build this ranch from nothing. Saturday arrived with agonizing slowness. James bathed in the creek, shaved carefully, and put on his best shirt, the dark blue one without any visible mending. Thomas watched the preparations with amusement. You are nervous, Thomas observed. I have never seen you nervous before, not even that time we were surrounded by rustlers in the canyon. That was just getting shot at, James muttered, struggling with his collar button. This is important. They rode into Clearwater together as the sun was setting, the church already glowing with lantern light. Music and laughter spilled out into the warm evening air. James felt his stomach twist with anxiety as they tied their horses to the rail. What if Catherine had changed her mind? What if she had decided to accept Richard Thornton after all? What if she had only been caught up in a moment of romance in the meadow and regretted it now? But then he stepped through the church doors and saw her standing near the refreshment table, wearing a dress the color of spring moss, her hair pinned up in an elegant style that showed the graceful line of her neck. She saw him at the same moment, and the smile that broke across her face erased every doubt in James's mind. He crossed the room to her side, barely aware of the curious looks from the other townspeople. Miss Moore, he said, suddenly formal in the presence of so many watching eyes. Mr. Hartley, Catherine replied, but her eyes were dancing. I am glad you could come. I would not have missed it for anything, James said. A tall man with slicked-back hair and an expensive suit materialized at Catherine's elbow. Catherine, you promised me the first dance, he said, his tone possessive. Richard, Catherine said, and James felt his jaw tighten. So this was Richard Thornton. He looked exactly as James had imagined, polished and confident and utterly sure of himself. I do not believe we have met, Richard said, turning to James with a look that was more assessment than greeting. Richard Thornton, and you are James Hartley. My brother and I have the ranch on the Eastern Range. Ah yes, the Hartley place, Richard said dismissively. Small operation, if I recall. We do well enough, James said evenly, refusing to rise to the bait. The fiddler struck up a reel and Richard took Catherine's arm. Come, my dear. Let us show these people how proper dancing is done." Catherine shot James an apologetic look as Richard led her to the dance floor. James watched them move through the steps, Richard's hand too tight on Catherine's waist, his smile too proprietary. Catherine was going through the motions, but the joy James had seen in the meadow was completely absent from her face. When the dance ended, Richard kept Catherine close, steering her toward a group of well-dressed men and their wives. James felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to find Thomas there with 2 cups of punch. "That is him, I take it," Thomas said. "The competition." "There is no competition," James said. "Catherine does not love him. Does she love you?" Thomas asked gently. "Brother, you only just met her." James took the punch but did not drink it. "I know it sounds crazy. I know it does not make sense, but Tom, I am going to marry that woman." Thomas studied his younger brother's face, then nodded slowly. "Then you had better go claim your dance before that peacock monopolizes her entire evening." James waited for the next dance to begin, then crossed the floor with determination. Catherine was standing with Richard and an older man who had to be her father. "Excuse me," James said politely. "Miss Moore, would you honor me with this dance?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "Catherine has already promised this dance to me as well." "Actually," Catherine said quickly, "I only promised you the first dance, Richard. I am free to dance with whom I choose after that." She placed her hand in James's before Richard could protest further, and James led her onto the floor as the fiddler began a waltz. The moment they came together, the noise and crowd seemed to fade away. They moved in perfect synchronization, just as they had in the meadow. "Thank you for rescuing me," Catherine whispered. "Richard has been hovering all evening. I gave him my answer on Friday, and he is not taking it well." James's heart leaped. "What answer did you give him?" "I told him no," Catherine said, looking up at James with an expression that made him dizzy. "I told him I could not marry a man I did not love. He was quite angry. He said I would regret throwing away such an opportunity." "Do you regret it?" James asked. "Not for one single second," Catherine said, "especially not now." They danced 3 more dances together, ignoring the whispers and pointed looks from the other townspeople. Catherine's father approached them during a break in the music, his expression stern. "Catherine, a word please," he said. Catherine squeezed James's hand, then followed her father to a quiet corner. James could not hear their conversation, but he could see Mr. Moore's agitated gestures, could see Catherine shaking her head firmly. Finally, she turned and walked back to James, her chin held high. "My father is not pleased with me," she said. "He thinks I am making a terrible mistake turning down Richard's proposal. He thinks I am being foolish." "Are you?" James asked. "I am being reckless," Catherine admitted. "I am throwing away security for something that might not even exist. But James, I am tired of being sensible. I am tired of doing what is expected. For once in my life, I want to choose something just because it makes me feel alive." James took both her hands in his. "Catherine, I know this is too soon. I know we barely know each other. But I need you to know that I am serious about this, about you. I am not playing games. I am not looking for a casual flirtation." "What are you looking for?" Catherine asked, her voice barely audible over the music starting up again. "You," James said simply. "I am looking for you. I think I have been looking for you for a very long time." Over the following weeks, James and Catherine saw each other as often as propriety and their responsibilities allowed. James found excuses to come into town for supplies, always timing his visits to coincide with Catherine's shifts at her father's store. Catherine agreed to let James take her on picnics and rides, though she insisted on maintaining some discretion given how recently she had turned down Richard's proposal. But word spread quickly in a small town like Clearwater. People talked. Some thought Catherine was foolish for passing over Richard Thornton's wealth for a struggling rancher. Others whispered that she was moving too quickly. that it was not decent to be seen with another man so soon. Richard himself was spreading rumors, suggesting that Catherine had been carrying on with James even before she rejected his proposal, that she was not the virtuous woman everyone thought. Catherine held her head high through it all, but James could see the toll it was taking. One afternoon in late July, he found her sitting on a bench behind the store, her eyes red from crying. "What happened?" James asked, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "Mrs. Patterson came into the store today," Catherine said, her voice shaking. "She said I was a disgrace to my family. She said no decent woman would behave the way I have been behaving. Then she left without buying anything, and I know it is because she disapproves of me." James pulled her close, letting her rest her head on his shoulder. "I am so sorry, Catherine. I never wanted to cause you trouble." "You did not cause this," Catherine said fiercely, pulling back to look at him. "I made my choices with my eyes wide open. I just did not realize how cruel people could be." "Do you regret those choices?" James asked, afraid of the answer. "No," Catherine said immediately. "Never. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, James. I just wish everyone could see you the way I do." James cupped her face in his hands. "I do not care what they see. I only care about you. Catherine, I love you. I know it has only been a few weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you and I want to marry you." Catherine's breath caught. "James, I know your father does not approve of me. I know I do not have as much to offer as Richard Thornton. But I can promise you this. I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you looked dancing in that meadow. I will never take you for granted. I will never stop seeing you, truly seeing you for exactly who you are." Tears spilled down Catherine's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I started loving you the moment you asked me to dance. Yes, James, yes, I will marry you." James kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Catherine was laughing through her tears. "My father is going to have apoplexy," she said. "Let me talk to him," James said. "Let me prove to him that I am serious, that I can provide for you." That evening, James presented himself at the general store just as Mr. Moore was closing up. The older man's expression was not welcoming, but he invited James inside and gestured to a chair near the pot-bellied stove. "I suppose you are here about Catherine," Mr. Moore said without preamble. "Yes, sir," James said. "I am here to ask for your blessing to marry your daughter." Mr. Moore sighed heavily. "Mr. Hartley, I am sure you are a fine young man, but you must understand my position. I have worked my entire life to build something stable for my family. I want security for my daughter. Richard Thornton could have given her that. You, from what I understand, are barely scraping by on that ranch of yours." "We had a hard few years," James admitted, "but we are turning things around. We have a good herd now, and we just secured a contract to supply beef to the Army fort. We are not wealthy, but we will be comfortable. And more than that, I will cherish your daughter. I will respect her and honor her and spend every day trying to earn the gift of her love." "Pretty words," Mr. Moore said skeptically. "But words do not put food on the table or a roof over one's head." "No, sir, they do not," James agreed, "but hard work does, and I am not afraid of that. I am asking for a chance to prove myself to you. Give me 6 months. If by then you do not think I can provide adequately for Catherine, I will step aside." Mr. Moore studied James for a long moment. "And what does my daughter say about all this?" "She says yes," James replied. "She wants to marry me with or without your blessing, but it would mean the world to her and to me if we had it, Mr." Moore was silent for so long that James thought he might refuse outright. Then he said, "I will give you 4 months. If by October you can show me that you have the means to support a wife, I will give you my blessing. But you will not marry Catherine until then. She will continue to live here with me, and your courtship will be proper and above reproach. Are we clear?" "Perfectly clear, sir," James said, relief flooding through him. "Thank you." He shook Mr. Moore's hand and left the store with renewed determination. 4 months was not long, but it was enough. He would make it enough. The summer passed in a blur of backbreaking work and stolen moments with Catherine. James and Thomas worked from dawn until long after dark, expanding their herd, improving their ranch buildings, proving to anyone who cared to look that the Hartley Ranch was a solid operation. James saved every penny he could spare, planning for the home he wanted to build for Catherine. Catherine, for her part, endured the continued gossip and judgment from some of the townspeople with grace and dignity. She continued to work in her father's store, continued to hold her head high. And whenever James came to town, her face would light up in a way that made every hour of hard labor worth it. They stole time together when they could, always careful to observe propriety for her father's sake. They took walks along the creek on Sunday afternoons, attended church services together, sat on the store's front porch in the evenings while Mr. Moore watched from inside. They talked about everything, learning each other's stories, dreams, fears. Catherine told James about her mother, who had died when Catherine was 12, leaving her to take over the running of the household. James told Catherine about his parents, about the war that had taken their Virginia home, about the dream that had brought him and Thomas west to build something new. "I want children someday," Catherine said one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "At least 3 or 4. I hated being an only child after my mother died. I want our children to have siblings, to have each other." "I want that too," James said, his arm around her shoulders. "I want a house full of noise and laughter. I want to watch you teach our daughters to dance in meadows, and I want to teach our sons to ride and rope." "Tell me about the house you are planning," Catherine said, snuggling closer. James smiled. "It is not much yet, just a cabin really, but I am adding on to it. There will be 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen with a cast-iron stove, and a parlor with large windows facing west so you can watch the sunsets. I am building a porch all the way around so you can sit outside on summer evenings. And I am going to clear a space in front for a garden, whatever flowers and vegetables you want to plant." "It sounds perfect," Catherine whispered. By October, the ranch was thriving. The Army contract had proven lucrative, and James had managed to save a respectable amount of money. He had finished the additions to the cabin, though it was still sparse inside, waiting for Catherine's touch to make it a home. On the first Saturday of the month, he rode into town and asked Mr. Moore to come out to the ranch to see what he had accomplished. Mr. Moore agreed, and the next day, James gave him a complete tour. He showed him the healthy cattle grazing in the pastures, the sturdy barn and corrals, the well-built cabin with its new additions. He showed him the account books that proved the ranch's steady income. Thomas joined them for the tour, answering Mr. Moore's questions about their business model and future plans with the confidence of a man who knew his trade. When the tour was finished, Mr. Moore stood on the new porch and looked out over the rolling grasslands. "You have done well," he admitted. "Better than I expected, truthfully." "Then I have your blessing." James asked, hardly daring to hope. Mr. Moore turned to face him. "You have proven you can provide for my daughter materially, but I need to know one more thing. Will you let her dance, James? Will you let her be who she is? Or will you try to tame her spirit to fit some mold of what you think a wife should be?" "Sir, the last thing I would ever want to do is change Catherine," James said earnestly. "I fell in love with her spirit, with her joy, with the way she dances alone in meadows. I want to spend the rest of my life giving her reasons to dance." Mr. Moore's stern expression finally cracked into something resembling a smile. "Then you have my blessing, son. Marry my daughter and make her happy." James and Catherine were married in the Clearwater Church on a crisp November morning in 1876. Catherine wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. James wore a new black suit that Thomas had insisted on buying as a wedding present. The church was full, not because everyone approved, but because even those who had gossiped wanted to witness the wedding. Richard Thornton was conspicuously absent, having left town the month before to pursue business interests in Denver. Catherine walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes locked on James's face, and when Mr. Moore placed her hand in James's, he whispered, "Take care of her." "I will, sir," James promised. "I swear I will." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Catherine with all the love and promise he could pour into that single moment. The congregation applauded, and for the first time since James had met her, Catherine did not seem to care at all what anyone else thought. She only had eyes for him. The reception was held at the church social hall, with music and dancing and food contributed by the townspeople. James and Catherine danced the first waltz together, and James hummed the same melody he had hummed in the meadow all those months ago. Catherine laughed with pure joy, and James knew that this was what happiness looked like. They spent their wedding night in the cabin James had prepared. He carried Catherine over the threshold, and she gasped with delight when she saw the interior. While they had been at the wedding, Thomas had filled the cabin with wildflowers, bunches of purple lupines and golden poppies in every corner, a tribute to the meadow where they had first danced. "Oh, James," Catherine breathed, "it is perfect." That night they came together as husband and wife, learning each other with tenderness and passion, creating a bond that went beyond words. Afterward, they lay in each other's arms, talking softly about their future, about the life they would build together. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, as all first years are. Catherine threw herself into making the cabin a home, sewing curtains, braiding rugs, planting a kitchen garden in the spring. She learned to cook on the cast-iron stove, sometimes with great success, and sometimes with failures that had them all laughing. Thomas lived in the old bunkhouse now, giving James and Catherine privacy, but he took his meals with them, and Catherine treated him like the brother she had never had. The ranch continued to prosper. James and Thomas expanded their operation, hiring 2 ranch hands to help with the work. Catherine kept the books, proving to have a sharp head for business that helped them make smart decisions about when to sell cattle and when to hold them. She also took over the vegetable garden, expanding it to include not just what they needed but enough to sell at her father's store, creating another small stream of income. But more than the material success, it was the small moments that made their marriage rich. James would come in from a long day of work to find Catherine humming while she cooked dinner, and his heart would swell with love. Catherine would wake up in the morning to find James watching her sleep, his eyes full of wonder that she was really his. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, Catherine in the rocking chair James had made for her, his hand resting on her knee as they watched the sun set over the mountains. On their first anniversary, James took Catherine back to the meadow where he had first seen her dance. The wildflowers were gone now, replaced by the golden grasses of autumn, but the place was still magical. They spread a blanket and had a picnic, then James pulled Catherine to her feet. "Dance with me," he said. "There is no music," Catherine replied, echoing her words from that first day. "You have never needed music," James said, and began to hum. They waltzed through the meadow just as they had a year ago, except now they wore matching gold bands and shared a home and a life. When they finally stopped, both breathless and laughing, Catherine pulled James down for a kiss. "I have something to tell you," she said, her eyes shining. "What is it?" James asked. "I am carrying our child. You are going to be a father." James let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, then immediately set her down, worried he might hurt her. "Are you all right? Should you be dancing? Should you be out here?" Catherine laughed at his instant transformation into a worried husband. "I am perfectly fine. The baby will not arrive until late spring." "I am healthy and strong, James. Do not turn into one of those hovering husbands who treats his wife like spun glass." "I will try," James said, pulling her close again, "but I cannot promise anything." "Catherine, we are going to be parents." "I know," she whispered against his chest. "I am terrified and thrilled all at once." "You are going to be an amazing mother," James said with certainty. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Catherine continued to work around the house and keep the books, though James and Thomas conspired to take over the heavier chores without making it obvious. Mr. Moore visited often, excited about the prospect of becoming a grandfather, and the relationship between him and James had warmed considerably. Even the townspeople who had been most critical of Catherine's choices seemed to soften, offering congratulations and hand-me-down baby clothes. In late May of 1878, after a long labor that left James pacing the floor with worry, Catherine delivered a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel James Hartley, and he had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. James held his son for the first time with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the fierce love and protectiveness that surged through him. "He is perfect," James whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Catherine, he is absolutely perfect." "We made him," Catherine said tiredly but happily from the bed. "Can you believe it? We made a person." Life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting, and more wonderful than either of them had imagined. Samuel was a good baby, curious and alert, and he seemed to bring even more joy into their already happy home. Thomas was a devoted uncle, carving toys and telling stories. Mr. Moore visited weekly, utterly besotted with his grandson. When Samuel was 6 months old, Catherine announced she was pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter in the summer of 1879, a tiny girl with blonde hair and Catherine's brown eyes. They named her Rose Elizabeth, and she completed their family in a way James had not known was missing. The years rolled by, full and rich. James and Thomas continued to build the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory. They added more land, more cattle, hired more hands. But James never let the work consume him the way he saw it consume other men. He always made time for his family, for evenings on the porch with Catherine, for teaching Samuel to ride, for dancing with Rose in the parlor while Catherine played the piano they had finally been able to afford. When Samuel was 5 and Rose was 4, Catherine announced that a third child was on the way. This pregnancy was harder than the first two, leaving Catherine tired and nauseated for months. James worried constantly, but Catherine assured him everything was fine. In the spring of 1884, she gave birth to twin boys, Michael and Matthew, identical in every way except that Michael had a small birthmark on his left shoulder. The cabin became too small for their growing family, so James built a proper house, a 2-story structure with 6 bedrooms and a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Catherine designed every detail, and James made sure to include large windows in the parlor facing west, just as he had promised all those years ago. Life was not without challenges. There were years when drought threatened the herd, years when cattle prices dropped and money was tight. Samuel broke his arm falling from a horse when he was 8, nearly giving James a heart attack. Rose developed a serious fever when she was 6, and they spent 3 terrifying days unsure if she would recover. The twins were mischievous and constantly getting into trouble, requiring Catherine to develop eyes in the back of her head. But through it all, James and Catherine's love remained the foundation everything else was built on. They still danced in the parlor on Saturday evenings, teaching their children the steps. They still stole moments alone when they could, still looked at each other with the same wonder they had felt in the meadow. On difficult days, when the work seemed overwhelming or the children were particularly challenging, James would pull Catherine close and whisper, "I would do it all again, every single moment, just to have you." Mr. Moore lived to see all 4 of his grandchildren grow into young adults before he passed peacefully in his sleep in 1895. He left the general store to Catherine, who surprised everyone by running it herself, proving as capable a businesswoman as her father. She hired someone to manage the day-to-day operations while she balanced the demands of the store with her family responsibilities. Thomas married in 1887, a widow named Ellen who had 2 children of her own. They built a house on the far end of the ranch property, and the Hartley Ranch became a true family operation, with cousins growing up together, learning the trade, carrying on the legacy James and Thomas had built. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose inherited her mother's business acumen and eventually took over running the store, expanding it into a successful mercantile. Michael and Matthew were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, and both showed a talent for working with horses that made them invaluable to the ranch operation. As James approached 50, he sometimes found himself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought him to that meadow on a June afternoon 20 years earlier. If he had ridden a different route, if Catherine had chosen to dance somewhere else, if he had been less bold in approaching her, their lives would have been completely different. They might never have met at all, but they had met. He had watched her dance alone, had been captivated by her unself-conscious joy, and had found the courage to ask for a waltz. And that single decision had led to everything else, to this life full of love and laughter and purpose. On their 20th anniversary in 1896, James took Catherine back to the meadow. It had become a tradition, this annual pilgrimage to the place where their story began. The meadow looked much as it had that first day, carpeted in wildflowers, peaceful and perfect. "I was thinking," James said as they stood hand in hand looking out over the flowers, "about that day I first saw you here, about how I almost did not stop. I was tired from the cattle drive and I was thinking about getting home, but then I saw you and something made me stay." "Fate," Catherine said simply. "It was fate. Do you believe in that?" James asked, "That some things are meant to be." "I believe that some things are worth fighting for," Catherine replied. "I believe that when you find something real, you do not let it go, no matter what anyone else says. I believe that the best things in life require courage." "You were worth every bit of courage it took," James said, turning to face her. 20 years had added some gray to her hair and fine lines around her eyes, but to James, she was just as beautiful as she had been that first day. More beautiful because now he knew her, truly knew her, and loved every single part of who she was. "Dance with me," Catherine said, exactly as she had said it so many times before. James pulled her into his arms, into the familiar position they had held thousands of times over the years, and began to hum. They waltzed through the meadow, crushing the sweet scent from the wildflowers, moving together with the ease of long practice and deep love. Their children were grown or nearly so, the ranch was thriving, they had built a good life together. But in this moment, in this meadow, they were just James and Catherine, the cowboy and the woman dancing alone, finding each other over and over again. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of amber and rose, they finally stopped dancing and simply held each other. "I love you," James whispered into Catherine's hair. "Every day I love you more." "I love you too," Catherine replied. "Thank you for stopping that day, thank you for watching me dance, thank you for asking me to waltz." "Thank you for saying yes," James said. They stood there as the light faded, two people who had found each other against the odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting. Tomorrow they would return to the demands of the ranch and the store, to their children and their responsibilities. But tonight they had this, the meadow and the memories and each other. In the years that followed, James and Catherine watched their children marry and have children of their own. The ranch passed to Samuel and the twins, who ran it with the same dedication their father and uncle had shown. Rose married a teacher from Denver and settled in Clearwater. Raising her family above the mercantile, she expanded into a thriving business. The Hartley name became synonymous with integrity and success throughout Wyoming. James and Catherine grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They spent their later years on the porch of the house James had built, watching grandchildren play in the yard, watching sunsets paint the sky in colors that never grew old. James's hair went completely white, and his body grew stiff from decades of ranch work, but Catherine still saw the young man who had watched her dance in a meadow. Catherine's hands grew gnarled with arthritis, but she could still sew and keep books and run her store with sharp efficiency. On quiet evenings, James would sometimes hum that old Viennese waltz, and Catherine would rise from her rocking chair and they would dance slowly on the porch, their movements careful now but still perfectly synchronized. Their grandchildren would watch and wonder, seeing something in their grandparents' eyes that spoke of mysteries they were too young yet to understand. James passed first in the winter of 1923 at the age of 72. He died in his sleep with Catherine beside him, his hand in hers, the way they had slept for 47 years. Catherine held him as the morning light crept through the windows, and she did not cry. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for every day, every dance, every moment of this beautiful life we built together." She lived another 3 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the meadow, about the day a cowboy watched her dance and changed the course of her life. She insisted on taking one last trip to the meadow in the summer of 1925, though her children worried it was too much for her. They carried her chair to the spot, and she sat among the wildflowers, her eyes closed, swaying slightly as though hearing music only she could perceive. "He is here," she told her children. "I can feel him. He is asking me to dance." Catherine Moore Hartley passed peacefully in her sleep that night at the age of 73 in the house her husband had built for her. Her children found her with a smile on her face, her hand outstretched as though reaching for someone only she could see. They buried her beside James on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree. The grandchildren, now grown with children of their own, planted wildflowers around the graves, lupines and poppies that would bloom every summer, a reminder of the meadow where it all began. The Hartley Ranch continued for generations, passed down through Samuel's line and the twins' children, a lasting testament to what James and Thomas had built. The mercantile in Clearwater remained a Hartley business for over a century, managed by Rose's descendants. The story of James and Catherine became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, about the cowboy who watched a woman dance alone in a meadow, who waited for an hour before asking for a waltz, and how that single moment of courage led to a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, when the light slants golden across the Wyoming grasslands and the wildflowers sway in the breeze, those who know where to look might see two figures dancing in a distant meadow, waltzing together through eternity, their love story written in the land itself, in the flowers and the grass and the endless western sky.